Well, thank you, everyone. I just want to start off by saying, wow, how impressive you are. The energy in this room, the incredible active listening and how you're leaning in, it's so impressive. And that's why you're here. You're here because you are ready to innovate, you're pioneers, you're ready to lead the way. And particularly you're here because you're interested in getting your organizations ready for tomorrow. So when I think about what it takes to move us forward and propel us towards the future, and any significant breakthrough that happened in the past few decades, there's a common thread that goes through all of them. And what is that thread? So if you take the story that Octavius Black shared earlier this morning about Ignaz Semmelweis and the science behind hand washing hygiene, you take the story of Marie Curie and radiation, you even look at kind of what's happening with SpaceX and the different launches and reviews and different failures and experiments they're running on their journey and mission towards Mars. I mean, the common thread here is their radical focus on evidence. And so I'd like to start with the question of how much are we applying evidence in our organization? Big question, I realize. So let's start with one topic. Let's start with well-being. So I don't have to tell you about what it feels like right now in terms of what your workforce looks like and feels like, and maybe what you feel like. The burnout crisis is real. The negative impacts from the pandemic, we're still feeling the after effects of it. We still feel right now the incredible exhaustion, the remote work. Who's back-to-back on Zoom almost every day? Like, let's admit it for a second. No, a little bit. I know you are, right? So the back-to-back on Zooms, and it's no wonder that half the workforce are feeling detached and disengaged right now. In fact, in the UK alone, mental health crisis is, in terms of costing employers, it's costing employers up to £56 billion a year in loss in productivity, employee absenteeism, and employee churn. So what are we going to do about this? Well, we spend. We spend a lot of money. Right now, the spend is projected for companies to invest in well-being initiatives is climbing up to $100 billion. Sorry, that's the US. UK. So 100 billion pounds by 2030. Incredible, isn't it? The question then is, well, is it worth it? Is it going to work? Is it working? I'd love to invite you right now to open up to your apps, your event apps, and there should be in your agenda for this keynote session a poll that will pop up shortly. And that poll, I'd love if you could respond to this question that you see in your phones and on the screen. To what extent do you think corporate well-being programs improve employee well-being? So I'll give you a few moments to put that in. So is it improving it a great deal? Is it improving a little bit or not at all? Not making a difference. So we're going to give you a few seconds. Thank you. Okay, coming in right now, I don't know if you guys see this coming out, but right now a lot of people are saying numbers are changing. I'll close it out soon. I'm gonna stop it here. So I'm seeing close to 70% of you in the room feel corporate programs and improving employee well-being is that you feel very little is happening. 70% of you feel that way in the room. So what does evidence suggest about corporate well-being programs? What I'm going to share with you is a research study right now that's going to come up. This was a really large research study, randomized control study that surveyed over 33,000 employees over a period of 18 months. And what this study was doing, it was set out to test a hypothesis, exactly the poll was asking, are corporate well-being programs improving employee mental health? And so they found, well, yeah, there was a lot of positive impact. So what types of interventions made that positive impact? So the interventions that made this positive impact were something along the lines of nutritional guidance, on-site gym access, reduction of stress reduction strategies. These interventions did have a positive impact, in fact, on engaging in regular exercise and active intent on weight management. But here's a shocking thing about this research. These same interventions made 0 to no impact on 78 out of 80 measures. I saw some of your jaws drop. So it is shocking, because the 78 out of 80 measures that it didn't make an impact on are the things that you care about in this room. So things that didn't make a significant impact is on mental health and well-being, sleep, healthcare spend, and particularly business metrics, job performance, productivity, employee retention. So if this doesn't work, how we're approaching things in terms of well-being doesn't work now, what does? Well, let's talk about what helps well-being in general. So what are the components that really impact employee well-being? What we have here is a lot of things that impact your well-being is personal. So it's your personal history, your attitudes, your traits. Okay, we recognize that. There's a lot of things that impact your well-being outside of work. Again, you recognize this. Your relationship with your friends, your family, your pets, your sleep habits, your vacation habits, what have you, world events. Then there's a bunch of things that directly impact well-being at work. So what are those things? Well, it's your relationship with your bosses, your colleagues, your staff. It's your organizational culture, so much of what we were talking about today, even physical workspace. Now, the problem with a lot of corporate well-being initiatives is that it only focuses on the periphery. Only the things on the periphery, on the edge of things that could really impact meaningfully at work. So as employers in the room, you certainly are not allowed or maybe even obligated, or it's not even comfortable for you to impact anything too personal into people's lives and their lives outside of work. Like, how is that part of your job, right? But what you can do is impact everything in the green. But a lot of these programs are not getting at it. So what does? Well, we distilled from the vast literature in terms of what can move the needle at the most holistic and sustainable way to go after well-being, and what we came up with, if you were so lucky to attend one of the breakout sessions with Dr. Tessa West and Roy Diggory on well-working, the drivers of well-being. So again, thinking about the things at work that we can meaningfully impact, this is how we can use these levers to then manage people's well-being, enhance their well-being at work, and reduce their state of ill-being. Let's do another one. Let's do another one here. Sorry, was that fast? Did you? Okay. Let's do one more here. So in terms of this topic, another topic we'll pick through, where can we say conventional wisdom doesn't always match with what the evidence suggests? Let's do this one. So coaching is a tool by, a means to an end, right? So coaching, a lot of people are using coaching lately. I think I was in one of the coaching sessions, 100% of my room experienced coaching before, 100%. And so what coaching really does is the tools by means by which that we upskill leaders. So there's so much going on. You all feel this, you all know this. The complexity that we're navigating in, we're upskilling leaders and needing so, and we do it by coaching. And there's a good amount of spend on it happening. So in the US alone, over $14 billion is being spent on coaching now, and that cost is rising. And the outcomes can be quite variable. I mean, you can get a really good outcome in terms of it. You can move your performers from mediocre to top performers, but sometimes it could do great harm in coaching. So what we're going to talk about here is how to get it right. But before that, let's talk about this poll. So one more for you. So what do you think matters most when choosing a coach? You have 4 options to put into your poll. You have that relationship chemistry with the coach. Maybe some of their industry or functional knowledge really matters to you. Or perhaps the way they approach coaching really matters. And maybe the hours of coaching experience they have. So what really matters to you when you think about using a coach or leveraging one? Okay, inputting some data. I'm sure you're seeing it live in live action as well. Amazing. Okay, so I'm gonna let you keep filtering that in, but I see on the top of the poll coming out, more than 50% of those in the room feel chemistry is one of the most important components when choosing a coach. And that's intuitively understandable and completely, natural. Why wouldn't you want a coach to really get you so they could help you and you could learn, right? Like if you don't feel like you could relate to the coach, it's hard to move things along, it feels like. Now the thing about this is you're not alone. 84% of coachees also chose relationship and chemistry with the coach as one of the most important components for a successful coaching outcome. But is that the way to lead? Well, what evidence suggests is that only 8% of performance improvement is actually explained by a supportive coaching relationship. So it's not that it's not that chemistry doesn't matter at all. It's not unimportant, but it's not the whole story. It's only 8% of that story. So what is it that moves this 8% of performance improvement to something bigger? Well, what we did at MindGym is our MindGym psychologists and team of behavior scientists, they scoured the vast, and you could imagine, fragmented coaching literature. And they found in that literature, tried to identify the active ingredients that really bring coaching to life, and what about coaching can really drive behavior change and help improve performance. And they distilled that into this finding that coaching that incorporates a psychologically informed methodology has the greatest impact. So what type of impact is it making? Well, 80% goal attainment, 34% job satisfaction and intention to stay, and an increase of 22% in resilience and well-being. So a psychologically informed methodology is key to unlocking the outcomes of coaching today. Now, what we've done at MindGym is take that information and really try to distill, okay, what does it mean to be psychologically informed? What does that look like in practice? What we've done is distill that into what we call the 3 components of precision coaching. So this is MindGym's proprietary coaching methodology in 3 components, and these are the 3 components that we apply in practice and coaching to move that needle for you in terms of performance improvement. So these components incorporate solutions focus, so this is really quickly not being problem-focused, behavior enablement, how to move you to quicker change pace, and having a sense of win and mastery. So now that we've talked about, I know I'm moving quickly, now that we talked about well-being and we've talked about coaching, let's just do one more on, sorry, I'm gonna skip this. I'm gonna come back to this. Let's do one more on DE&I. So this hot topic on diversity, equity, and inclusion. All of you in this room are global stakeholders, and you are accountable for moving business metrics to attract and hire really amazing talent and deliver on innovation. And we know that in order to unlock that growth strategy is to incorporate diversity and inclusion into your industry and your organizations. Because we know companies that are more inclusive are 6 times more innovative and 8 times more likely to achieve business metrics. Now, that is all great, and we know that it makes sense. So we actually spend a great deal on DE&I. In fact, $9.3 billion worth annually on DEI. So when we think about DEI, what comes to mind? Well, the conversations we've been having is some of us feel just a bit of DEI fatigue. And it's not that this fatigue in terms of, oh, it's not as relevant, or it's less meaningful. There's fatigue because there's a question of the energy and the momentum we accrued, especially in the past 3 years. Is it moving us any closer? Are we any better off? That's the fatigue that's settling in right now. Now, you might have that question in your minds too, and what I'm sharing here is, well, the approaches that got us here are not gonna be the ones that get us out. This is not, and we'll share. So what are these approaches we've been applying so far for DEI challenges? Well, in terms of stereotyping and recognizing that we have characteristics and labels, well, it unintentionally can trigger a sense of, well, if we're all implicitly biased, aren't we all kind of a little racist and sexist anyway? And then there's a sense of normalizing this, right? So there's a backfire of this, especially when we talk about stereotyping. In DEI segregation, in the efforts to make everyone feel individually accepted and valued, then we create a lot of identity-based groups, like ERGs. And so we celebrate one group, but then inadvertently you just set up a competition with another group. That's like, well, what about us? What about me? Do I not have a voice in this? I'm seeing a lot of head nods. You're really feeling this too. And then in terms of that politicization and polarization, there's so much social pressure on leaders today to listen to what's going on out there and bring it in. And what I mean by bring it in is, are we responding in the ways adequately? And if you're not responding adequately, you're penalized. And in fact, if you don't respond at all and there's inaction, you're doubly penalized. It's almost like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And so where are we on this polarization, right? And so these approaches in terms of trying to achieve really good things with positive intent, all of this was done with positive intent, and we are making some progress. But this is not moving us as quickly as we would like. So let me just suggest another way. So this is a research study that I'm going to share for you by Dr. Lasana Harris. He's a professor of UCL and also a member of our academic board. And what he observed in a classroom in Chicago was that there was a disproportionate amount of black students receiving detention than their white peers. Now, instead of going to the teachers and staff and calling them out and saying, hey, what's going on here? Why are you mistreating the black kids? Instead of doing that, all he did was ask a simple question. What made you want to become a teacher? And so he took that simple question and asked teachers to reflect on that, write up their personal stories of why they became teachers in the first place. And they ultimately came down to the purpose of, because I want to better their lives. I want to give them a chance at success. And that was what he did. He connected their purpose, empowering them to go back to their original career mission. And that garnered the sense of empathy to the students. And what he found with this simple technique and intervention, he watched a 45% reduction in racial disparity and detention in that classroom, as well as continual decline into the next academic year. So what Dr. Harris's research, the take-home point is, instead of confronting bias so directly, how about you sideline it? You sideline bias. So what does that mean? Well, fundamental to sidelining bias is your sense of it's priming our sense of how we want others to see us and how we see ourselves. And that's what psychologists call identity. And so with identity, in terms of that sidelining research, what he was priming was your most idealized form of yourself in your role. So it's not about your sense of identity in terms of your protected characteristics. So it's not about me being an Asian woman, being a certain age, being a certain way, but it's about me being the best chief science officer at MindGym ever can see. Seb, Octavius, you heard that? So it's about being the most idealized version of yourself in your role. And from there, we have what's protected around it, the 4 cornerstones to protect that identity. And so this is a model that we created with Dr. Lasana Harris and other academic board members to move this D&I conversation a bit further beyond than just the way we've been doing it. So hopefully by now, you see that in all these different topic areas that I covered as in rapid succession, well-being, coaching, and D&I, there's so much more I could do this for if I had more time. Leadership, performance management, hybrid work, ethics, I could do all this in terms of what does conventional approach look like and say, what feels intuitive sometimes, but what does evidence suggest? Could do this all day. And what we know is when you don't follow evidence, what you get is a lot of activity. So programs, initiatives for everything, flavor of the month, right? A lot of things, but not quite touching anyone meaningfully. But we can move towards together, incorporating evidence to more intelligent initiatives. So initiatives based on evidence and can also track and monitor progress. And that's where we'd love to move towards because that's what you're ready for. But this is only one half of the story. How exciting is that? So for that half, I'm inviting Dr. Sebastian Bailey up on stage.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Hello. Lovely to be with you. It's really nice to see some faces from years past and in some instances decades past. It's a real treat to be with you. So Janet has just given a very compelling exposition of why we really need to use the best possible sources of evidence as we're thinking about developing our behavioral change interventions, as we're thinking about how we support and change our organizations so that they are ready for tomorrow. How are we looking at the scientific evidence? How are we looking at our own internal data? How are we looking at evidence from experts? But as Janet said, it is just one part of the story. And we're here in this beautiful building, and the sun is shining, and it's spring in the UK. Did many of you reach for your antihistamines this morning? Yeah, we've got a few people in the house. My house has got lots of antihistamines being taken this morning. And thank goodness for the evidence and the scientific method that discovered the fact that this particular mixture of compounds helps reduce an allergic reaction to pollen and everything else. Thank goodness for that. But did you know that if you take antihistamines plus other types of drugs, and in particularly antidepressants, that combination of doses can become lethal? It can damage your kidneys, it can damage your liver. So we have to think not just about the evidence of certain types of intervention, but actually how does that sit with other interventions to create the greatest possible impact? How can we deliver the right intervention to the right person at the right time to deliver the right set of behaviors that drive the right set of business outcomes? And we're describing that as integration. How are we integrating our behavior change interventions to drive the best possible set of changes and deliver the best return on investment, and actually to deliver the best possible experience for our people? So just to think about what do our people experience currently, let's take a look at how we tend to make change happen now. And this could be delivering agile across your organization, it could be leadership development, it could be diversity, equity, and inclusion. Typically what occurs is that we recognize a need, we conduct a needs analysis, we get executive commitment, a couple of months passes, we source a supply, that might be internal or external, we do some design, we run a pilot, we then adapt the pilot, we launch, and we roll out, typically taking somewhere between 12 to 18, I'm getting lots of smiles in the audience, typically taking somewhere between 12 to 18 months from identifying that that's an issue to getting into deployment. The thing that worries me most about this is that our organizations need to be able to change faster than the market in which we're operating. To innovate, to grow, to respond to consumer demands, we have to build organizations that change really effectively. And currently, with a slight programmatic design, which is taking 12 to 18 months to respond, often the issues have changed by the time we've started to deploy. What then happens, did you know that the average tenure at the moment of a chief diversity officer is 18 months? 18 months from arrival to departure. What happens is that a new sponsor arrives 18 months later. There might be some evaluation. Often it's more light qualitative evaluation. We decide that a particular project is no longer fit for purpose. It gets sent into the L&D, OD, agile landfill, and we rinse and repeat the process. So we've got this slow and inefficient way of commissioning an inflexible, wasteful way of trying to deploy that across the organization. So this programmatic approach to solving problems within our companies is not helping us be ready for tomorrow. Let's then have a look at the way in which we think about the content or the material or the messaging that we're choosing to deploy. And my argument would be it looks a little bit like this. If we imagine a word cloud or a cloud of different concepts, so you've got executive leadership, change management, personal effectiveness, D&I, they overlap a bit. They presented in different ways. There are contrasting concepts. And we deploy this, we might do some curation, but we deploy this to our people, and fundamentally, they end up feeling somewhat confused. Operate rapidly, be decisive, empower yourself, make decisions. But also, build consensus, bring people with you, listen to voices on the periphery. And what we end up with is just confused people. Now, sometimes people say that the scarcest resource in organizations is time. It's not. Or they say that the scarcest resource in organizations is money. It's not. The scarcest resource in organization is people's attention. It's their ability to pay attention to and make sense of a series of significantly competing messages such that they can make sense of what's going on. They can make sense of context and then make the proper, appropriate decisions. And yet, with this conceptual contrast that we deliver for them, that becomes very hard to do. I liken this, my family is Maltese, and I get invited to these wonderful weddings in Malta, and there are 800 people, and inevitably there is this delicious buffet, and the buffet looks great, and I go up to the buffet, but when I return to my seat, I end up with a sort of beef lasagna and a tuna fish carpaccio, and I end up just deeply disappointed with the dinner. You know, I haven't been able to curate it for myself properly. And I think that's what we serve up in many respects to our people, where the total becomes less than the sum of the parts. So what do we need to do differently? What does the tasting menu look like? Well, it's an integrated set of concepts that make it easy for people to make sense of the problems that they're facing, the challenges that they can respond to, and the solutions that they can deploy. We need to have it aligned to the cultural artifacts of the organization. It needs to be connected back to the strategy that's being deployed. Of course it can be culturally relevant, of course it can be locally relevant, but there is a conceptual consistency across the messages and the concepts that we're communicating that make it easy for people to understand and easy for people to deploy. In many respects, if you heard the city conversation earlier on, and we were very, very privileged to have James and Jenny present back to us, so much of it was about ease and simplicity, but also integration into a broader cultural framework. So this idea of integrated content, integrated messages becomes a really important part of the story. But it's not the only part of the story. The other component is how are we doing distribution? How are we thinking about the dosage that we're providing people of our behavioral change interventions? How are we thinking about what we're deploying, how we're deploying, and when we're deploying? And really what we need to think about as we go through this is the different types of channel that we operate. We need one-to-many experiences. Peer learning is so extraordinarily powerful. Peer learning with a subject matter expert who can nudge people to ask the right questions and make sense of the right issues, extraordinarily powerful. So one-to-many. One-to-one, Janet gave you some of the reasons earlier on about one-to-one coaching can be extraordinarily powerful, particularly if you feel blocked around motivation or opportunity or identity, or you've got a Groundhog Day experience in terms of the challenges that arrive and a deeper type of problem needs to be resolved. One-to-one can be extraordinarily powerful. Or on demand. If I am highly motivated and able to clearly articulate what a problem is, on-demand interventions and learning are amazing return. Fast, solve the problem quickly, take the knowledge on, and move on. So we have one-to-one, one-to-many, and on-demand in terms of integrating distribution. But we also have the idea of it being in the workflow or adjacent to the workflow. And this is one of the things that I've been working on in the last couple of weeks that I'm very excited by. Our data scientists have connected to ChatGPT, and then they've trained ChatGPT on all of MindGym's 21 years of intellectual property. So we put all our intellectual property in. And then using the right types of prompts, ChatGPT is now able to both advise, with a Slack integration, advise the user on what to do with particular management challenges, provide speaking points, provide agendas, provides tools, and as we continue to build this out, also provide recommendations on other sources of behavior change and learning they could get into. Lucy here is from Microsoft and a very good friend of mine. Lucy, I'm still looking for that GPT-4 integration, please, API. If we start to think about the data that we can then aggregate across tens of thousands of people using this, we're then able to think very differently about how we deploy our interventions to people. We can be in the workflow or directly adjacent to the workflow and then provide the right intervention at the right time for the right people. We can also, again, if we integrate the behavioral measurement across all of the different platforms as opposed to having it somewhat separately, we're then able to be much, much more responsive to people's needs as opposed to go through that long-term 12 to 18-month planning issues that we have. So the data becomes a really fundamentally important part of the story. A couple of examples of where we've done this. The first one is with Burberry, who, again, fashion is a very, very interesting and complex business. Consumer tastes change very quickly. Supply chain at the moment is super complicated. The needed leadership population who really are fantastic at being able to lead change, who build change agility into the organization and are super responsive to what's happening in the broader marketplace. What we did with Burberry is both a live experience and a one-to-one experiences that were fully integrated along with some measurements, and we've seen some really nice results. Actually, the one on the left is the one that I'm proudest of, because often the toughest people to ask whether or not they've seen behavior change and performance improvement occur are the participants' managers. And if you look at many award submissions, if you can get sort of 35, 40% of participants' managers saying that they've seen a change, people declare significant victory. We saw 85% in this particular instance, 88% applying in their job, and then a 260% return on investment. On evaluation, we like to use the Phillips ROI methodology, which uses an individual's salary as a proxy for value. It's one of the most conservative evaluation methodologies in terms of benefit that you can use, which is why we apply. If you'd like me to explain more about that to you later, I'd be really happy to. We love doing the evaluation measures. So that's the story with Burberry. And then with a global energy giant going through an enormous transformation at the moment in terms of structure, strategy, deployment, and fundamentally culture. And hopefully this time next year we'll be able to have them on stage sharing their perspectives with you. But what we're doing here is we've integrated the end-to-end and the programmatic development from managing self, managing others, managing managers, and functional leaders. And that is then connected to the executive leadership development for business leaders, group leaders, and enterprise leaders. This is Ram Charan's leadership pipeline model. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. What typically happens is that there is a disconnect between these different levels, and then the kinds of issues we're facing is that we see functional leaders not really able to manage very well, not being able to lead change. They step down. Managing managers can't get out of the day-to-day work of the management, so their productivity starts to drop. Managing others almost do the work of an individual contributor, and because there isn't a proper clarity around the content or around the deployment, the whole architecture just starts to judder a bit. So our goal here is to build a much more integrated framework for these populations. So there we have it. We have this idea of both building a really strong evidence base coupled with high-quality integration, which is then much more likely to deliver a better return on investment, to be able to be deployed more appropriately, and crucially, give the people in your organizations a much, much improved experience. So if we map this out onto Janet's initial 2 quadrants of intelligent initiatives and activities, we then have levels of integration. So if you're low on evidence and high on integration, what you probably have is cohesive but highly kind of conventional and intuitively driven behavior change interventions across your organization. You're likely to say, well, we've integrated all of our assets so they complement each other, but when it's more been integrated on intuition as opposed to a strong sense of evidence. Or potentially we have people in the room today who do believe that they have a high level of integration and a high level of evidence, and then you are in the sunny uplands of an ecosystem approach where you're using your science and your data to deliver the optimal intervention at the moment of greatest value. Now, we were really curious about how people would respond to this. So would you mind opening your apps again? And we're going to have another vote. And we're curious to find out which quadrant would you place your organization currently? Are you currently in activity, low levels? I mean, you could also describe activity as being sort of opportunistic. We've got programs for everything, not so hot on the evidence, not so hot on the integration, but they're there. We've then got intelligent initiatives. So they're based on peer-reviewed science and our metrics, but we haven't been able to quite take the step for integration. That would be a very understandable quadrant. You've got the cohesive convention. Things are integrated, but our evidence base is more based on our intuition or perhaps senior stakeholder mandate, as opposed to necessarily what the data suggests is most required. And then finally, we have this ecosystem approach. Thank you, Abraham. How are we doing? All right, so we can see with 60 people voted, 48% of our audience say that they are in the activity quadrant. We have 31% who are in the intelligent initiatives quadrant, and 18% who are in the cohesive convention quadrant. So I think that what I imagine, particularly with the growth in technologies, the better evidence base making it to organizations, the closer connection between experts in terms of measurement and analytics and academic components partnering with practitioners, I think, and what I really hope we see over the coming years, is this shift into the top right-hand corner to get to that ecosystem. Final thought from me is that when I also reflect on my personal practice, how have I done over the last couple of decades, and how have we as an industry done? And this is going back to our medical metaphor that we started with. I often think that we operate too much like surgeons. So what happens is that we recognize that our organization in some way has some kind of sickness or disease. Let's say the liver is failing. We then make a decision to intervene, and we are going to run a liver transplant. So we get in there, into the operating theater, we remove the liver, we put a new liver in, and everything starts to function a bit better. We congratulate ourselves, and we go on our merry way. But what we haven't necessarily done is solved the underlying problem. So we can put a new liver into an individual, but if they continue to drink for the next 24 years heavily, then they may very well be back to 24 months, they may very well be back 2 years later for another operation. And instead of thinking in this very sort of technical approach where we're looking to sort of solve problems, my argument would be that we need to think a little bit more like a gardener, where we look at the issues that face us, and we start to anticipate what the issues may be. We look at the data that we have. We work today to prepare for what may occur in a number of months' time. We never see our work as being completely done. Unlike the surgeon, once the surgery's done, they believe they've completed it. The gardener is constantly adapting, recognizing, and intervening in a way that is appropriate for the situation that they're currently in. And that is the way I think we get ready for tomorrow, and not just for today's tomorrow, but for tomorrow's tomorrow and every tomorrow after that. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time and your energy, and we are due to go to lunch, which I believe is upstairs. So thank you very much.